The founder's son said I was a relic and fired me on the spot in front of 130 pairs of eyes. My name is Dominic Ward. I gave Skillion Tech 22 years of my life. When I started, we were just 4 guys brought in by the founder Craig Skillion. We worked out of a warehouse with laptops held together by duct tape and prayer. We didn't have a marketing budget or brand recognition, just cold calls, grit, and the crazy belief that we could change the B2B software game. And we did. Or rather, I did. I built a client base from scratch. Every handshake, every flight, every after-hours pitch over stale juice and peanuts. I made the deals that kept this company alive. By the time we hit our first $100 million year, I was sales director, managing a team of 30 and servicing billion-dollar contracts across 3 continents. Then Brian Skillion showed up, our founder's only son, fresh out of business school, full of jargon and buzzwords, wearing shoes that cost more than my first car. He got the CEO title before he ever set foot in the building. The board called it succession planning. I called it what it was, inheritance with a side of arrogance. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he'd learn. Maybe he'd earn it. He didn't. He replaced half of our experienced sales team with influencers and LinkedIn gurus. Said we needed a younger vibe and social-driven funnel culture. I said we needed contracts, relationships, and follow-through. He called me old school. I wore it like a badge. Then came the meeting. Friday morning. Company-wide all hands. I thought it was another one of Brian's rah-rah sessions. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Before we begin, Brian said, standing under bright lights like a game show host, we have a leadership change to announce. He didn't look at me, didn't give me a heads up, just turned to the crowd of 130 employees and said it. We're letting go of Dominic Ward, effective immediately. We're pivoting from legacy tactics to a more agile, data-driven sales vision. Silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Then came the sting. Dominic is a relic of a different era. We thank him for his service, but it's time to evolve. A relic. I stood there frozen. 22 years. And I was reduced to a punchline in a PowerPoint. No warning. No private conversation. No dignity. HR handed me a brown envelope like I was some delivery guy who got the wrong address. Inside, my severance terms, a non-disclosure agreement, and a pitifully short thank you letter. I didn't say a word, just turned and walked out of that conference room with every eye in the company on me. But as I passed the glass wall, I caught Brian smirking. That smug, that entitled smirk of a man who thought he'd just cleared the board. That's when I remembered something. Section 17 of my employment contract. A clause I'd negotiated quietly years ago during the company's Series B funding, back when they needed me more than I needed them. A clause most people overlooked because they never imagined I'd be disposable. It read, in the event of termination without cause, the employee retains partial non-exclusive rights to all client relationships originated solely through their effort and maintained for longer than 24 months. Legalese for, if you fire me for no reason, I get to keep what's mine. And Brian, in all his nepotistic brilliance, never read it. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. I didn't run to a lawyer. Not yet. I went home, sat down in my home office, and pulled up the private CRM I kept sync with my work one. Not illegal, not even discouraged. A backup, I'd always said, but it was more than that. It was a map of every client I'd ever brought in, every contact, every deal, every dinner, every personal cell number, every golf course, birthday, kid's name. I didn't have to steal anything. I already owned it. They fired me without cause. So, I was taking what was mine. I called my attorney Monday morning. A quiet pit bull named Deirdre Ross. Harvard Law. Tactical. Merciless. I told her about the clause. She smiled like a shark and said, "They're going to regret not reading the fine print." The next day I called for clients. Not pitching, not poaching, testing the water, just conversations. "Hey Jack, just wanted to say I'm no longer with Skill Ion. No hard feelings. But if you ever want to talk about new opportunities, I'm around." And they called back. Every single one. Because I wasn't a relic. I was the reason they signed in the first place. Brian thought the company owned the clients. But relationships don't live in contracts. They live in trust. And trust, that belonged to me. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning independence. And Brian had just handed me the launch pad. By day 3, sleep eluded me. Not because I was angry, though I was. Not because I was humiliated, though that too sat heavy in my gut like a stone. No, I couldn't sleep because I knew I had something Brian didn't. Leverage. While most men would have curled up with bourbon and bitterness, I curled up with my contract and case law. My attorney Deirdre had already confirmed the clause was airtight, but I wanted to see just how deep this hole could go. Because if I was going to light the match, I wanted to make sure the building burned to the foundation. I pulled out my folders. Yes, printed. I'm old school, remember? But I also had a system. Color-coded files for every major client. Notes on key personnel, deal histories, pain points, even lunch preferences. And on my laptop, a mirror of the private CRM I've been updating for years. Every contact cross-referenced with timelines, contract terms, and my involvement. By midnight, I had a terrifying realization. 80% of Skill Ion Tech's current client portfolio originated with me. Not the team, not Brian's LinkedIn strategists. Me. I brought them in. I'd closed the deals. I'd maintained those relationships for years. And thanks to the clause in my contract, I had a legal right to them. 80%. That's not leverage. That's a nuclear weapon. But before I pressed the button, I made one last pass through the data. News clippings, client posts, chatter on industry forums. I needed to know the state of play. And that's when I discovered something that almost made me laugh out loud. Brian had already started screwing it all up. Just 2 weeks into his reign, he'd made strategic pivots with zero consultation. He'd slashed support budgets, pushed for aggressive upsells, and replaced dedicated account managers with chatbots and junior reps. One longtime client, an enterprise logistics firm I'd personally kept happy for 8 years, had publicly hinted at shift in vendors. Another, a global telecom conglomerate, posted a thinly veiled jab on LinkedIn. When new leadership values ego over partnership, old friendships start looking like liabilities. Brian didn't just drop the ball. He kicked it into oncoming traffic. So I made the decision. No more chess moves. Time to launch the missile. The next morning, I called Deirdre. "Pull the trigger," I said. "Copy that," she replied. "Brace yourself. This won't stay quiet." She filed the legal documents that afternoon. A formal declaration invoking Section 17 of my contract. Partial non-exclusive control over all qualified client relationships upon termination without cause. What that meant, in legalese and reality, was simple. I now had the right to represent, serve, and monetize 80% of Skillion's existing client base. Skill Ion couldn't stop me. They couldn't even slow me down. And best of all, I didn't have to take anything. I just called the people who already trusted me. By sunset, my phone lit up with responses. "Jack from the telecom giant? Dom, thank God. We've been looking for a way out since Brian took over. Lisa from the financial software firm? We thought you'd retired. The moment you're back in the game, we're with you." Even my old contact at the federal agency I'd landed during the Obama administration said, "I never liked dealing with anyone, but you anyway." By the end of the week, I had verbal commitments from 18 of the top 25 clients I'd built. And Brian? He still thought he'd won, until he got the notice. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. My legal filing required that Skill Ion be formally informed of the activation of the clause. It landed on Brian's desk Friday morning, hand-delivered by a process server during a board meeting. From what I later heard, his reaction was legendary. He read it once, smirked, read it again, then turned red, threw his phone across the room, and stormed out. Because suddenly the relic had become a reckoning, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. I wasn't stealing or hacking. I was only walking through the front door of my own empire. The irony? Brian's own arrogance made it possible. He'd never reviewed my contract, never consulted legal, never considered that the man he fired publicly, without cause, might have planned for something like this. But I had, because I knew companies love you until you become inconvenient. So I'd built my escape hatch before they even considered burning the bridge. Now, I had what every fireman dreams of, but never gets. Power. Legal, strategic, and personal. And I wasn't going to use it for spite. I was going to use it for rebirth. I'd already bought the domain name, already incorporated the LLC, already drafted the brand guidelines. This wasn't revenge. This was replacement. Skill Ion fired me to make room for a kid with buzzwords and daddy's last name. They gave me no warning. Now, I was about to give them none in return, because the list they thought they owned, it was already mine. The message came through at 6:12 a.m. Simple, formal, almost sterile. Craig Skill Ion requests a private meeting. No attorneys, just you and him. I stared at it for a long moment, the same way a man might stare at a text from a ghost. Because Craig Skill Ion wasn't just the founder of Skill Ion Tech. He was the empire, the legend, the man who built the company from a basement server rack and a laptop in '98. The man who'd hired me in a diner booth in Midtown Manhattan when I was just 27. The man who once shook my hand after I landed our first Fortune 500 client and said, "You just bought my kids another decade of private school." And now, after all the years, all the loyalty, all the quiet sacrifices, I've been fired by his son. A Nepo baby with a podcast brain and no battle scars. So I replied with one word. Accepted. We met at his private residence in upstate New York. No security, no entourage, just Craig, aged and thinner, but still sharp in the eyes. He poured the coffee himself and didn't waste time. "I owe you an apology," he said, "and my son owes you a hell of a lot more than that." I didn't respond. I let the silence fill the room. Let him carry the weight. He rubbed his temples, then slid a thick folder across the table. Inside, damage reports, client loss estimates, projections. Skill Ion Tech was bleeding hard. Of the 32 major accounts I'd sourced, 26 had formally severed ties with the company or sent intent to leave notices. The remaining 6 were unresponsive, waiting to see where I landed. Craig's eye stayed on mine. I underestimated what Brian would do, or rather, what he wouldn't do. He didn't read your contract. He didn't respect the relationships you built. He didn't even understand why you mattered. He took a breath. I can't undo what he did, but I can stop the bleeding. I folded my arms. You're not asking for a truce. You're asking for surrender. No, Craig said, with a slow shake of his head. I'm asking for terms. I leaned back. He'd come prepared, and so had I. All right, I said. You want your client list back? Fine, but there are conditions. He sat up straighter. The first, I said, is that Brian's immediately removed from any executive leadership position. He can stay in the company, but not as CEO, not as CMO, not as anything that touches power. Craig didn't flinch. Done. The second, the sales team, the real team, not the influencers and interns he brought in, the old guard. They get equity. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You want me to give away ownership? I want them to stop being expendable, I said. They built this company. They bled for it. Give them a reason to stay. He nodded. Slowly. I can work with that. And the last one, I said, looking him dead in the eye. A public apology. Not from you. From Brian. On record. In writing. Preferably in the Wall Street Journal. He calls me outdated again. I want it memorialized that he was wrong. Craig was quiet. Longer this time. Then he said, he'll resist that. I shrugged. Then I keep the clients. He studied me. Not like a man trying to intimidate, but like a father realizing his kid wasn't the smartest one in the room anymore. "All right," he said. "You'll have it. All of it." I asked. He extended his hand. "All of it." We shook, and just like that, the storm shifted. 2 days later, the headlines hit. Skillion Tech restructures leadership amid client exodus. Founder reinstates veteran team after son's strategic missteps. Sales director's clause becomes industry case study in executive overreach. But the real gem? Page 4 of the Wall Street Journal. Full column editorial. Authored by Brian Skillion himself. In an effort to modernize what I misunderstood, I made decisions that cost this company its most valuable asset, trust. Dominic Ward is not a relic. He's a master of his craft, and I was wrong to underestimate him. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my new office. Because the deal I struck wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about dignity. About every person who's ever been thrown out after building the foundation someone else stands on. About making sure the next time a boardroom suit tries to discard a veteran for a buzzword, they pause and remember what happened to Skillion Tech. As for me, I didn't go back. I let Craig have his company back. Let the clients return to the contracts they trusted, if they wanted to. Now they had options, but I didn't return to the job. I was building something new now. Something smarter, leaner, bulletproof. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. Because when you've survived the fire, you don't run back into the building. You build your own, and you make damn sure it's yours. The fallout was swift. Brian Skillion was no longer CEO of Skillion Tech. The board wasted no time stripping him of all power, despite the public statements and mea culpas. The damage was already done. He was relegated to a non-leadership role, something corporate, something safe, before his father could blink. But his father had no complaints. They installed a new CEO, Tommy Reynolds, a former colleague of mine. We crossed paths a few times over the years, always on the same side. Sharp, methodical, and damn good at what he did. Not flashy, not a social media darling. Just a man who understood the value of loyalty, relationships, and long-term strategy. Tommy made the announcement himself. A press release that went out quietly, without the usual self-congratulatory flair Skillion Tech was known for. Skillion Tech is returning to its roots, Tommy said in his first address. We will rebuild trust, empower our team, and re-establish our reputation in the industry. We're focused on ethical leadership and long-term success. There was no mention of Brian, not in the release, not in the follow-up emails to employees. Tommy didn't need to explain. The message was clear. Brian was a footnote now, and the media had a field day with it. Headlines shouted about Brian's demotion and Skillion Tech's reckoning. Some outlets even referred to it as a cautionary tale for the age of nepotism. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't interested in playing the game anymore. Not the corporate game. Not the game where sycophants kiss the right rings and the real work gets buried under boardroom politics and vanity projects. I was done. So I did what any man with a reputation, a network, and a hell of a lot of leverage would do. I launched my own consultancy. A simple name, Dominic Ward & Associates. And I made sure the pitch was clear from the start. Ethical leadership, strategic sales growth, trust-first client relationships. No fluff, no buzzwords, just results. I took with me the clients who'd stuck by me, the loyal ones. The ones who'd seen past Brian's ignorance and had always trusted me to deliver. The first few months were a blur. Deals were signed, contracts executed. The clients who'd come with me saw immediate returns. We restructured their sales teams. We shifted focus to long-term relationships instead of the quarterly panic that plagued Skillion Tech under Brian's rule. And the results were undeniable. Revenue growth, client retention, real partnerships. I didn't need to scream about my success. The numbers spoke louder than any headline ever could. But I made sure to get my face in front of the right audience. A few months after the launch, I was invited to speak at a leadership conference in New York. One of those thought leadership platforms where industry giants come to boast about their latest disruptions. Only this time, I wasn't there to disrupt. I was there to restore. The interview with Forbes came shortly after. Dominic Ward, The Future of Ethical Leadership, was the headline. In the interview, I talked about my rise in the tech industry, my early years at Skillion Tech, the way we built something great, and how, in the end, it was trust and loyalty that kept clients coming back, not flashy promises or empty rhetoric. The questions were blunt, the kind of questions people ask when they know you've been through the fire. Do you think Skillion Tech could have avoided the damage Brian caused? Yes, if they'd put more stock in their people and less in their egos. Do you think the downfall of Brian Skillion is a sign of something bigger? Absolutely. It's a reminder that leadership isn't about who you know. It's about who trusts you to lead. And when you forget that, the fall is inevitable. The interview ran for 30 minutes, and I watched the numbers spike on social media. Shares, comments, likes. The industry took notice. Meanwhile, I was already deep into my next project, a partnership with several high-profile clients, ones who had seen firsthand what Tommy Reynolds was trying to build at Skillion Tech, and who now saw the value in working directly with me. That's when I got the call. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end didn't need an introduction. Dominic, Brian Skillion said, his voice tight. We need to talk. I let the silence stretch before answering. I'm listening, I said. I've been reassigned. Tommy made sure of that. You know where I stand. Yeah, I said, letting a smile creep across my face. I know exactly where you stand. He cleared his throat. It's been tough, man. Watching you do so well. You mean watching me do right? I said, funny how that works, huh? When you lead with integrity, it doesn't matter what's in your last name. You earn the trust. There was a long pause. Maybe I wasn't ready, he said finally. Maybe I didn't deserve the CEO role. No, I said, you didn't, and you never will. You just didn't have the tools. It was cruel, but it was also honest. I hung up without waiting for him to respond. A few weeks later, I saw him in the lobby of a downtown office building. The same suit, the same posture, but the air around him had changed. He was mid-level now, a manager, maybe. He wasn't in control anymore. And as I walked past him, I caught a glimpse of his face. He was watching me. On the TV screen above the reception desk, my Forbes interview was playing. Ethical leadership, long-term strategy, the new face of the future. And for the first time since everything began, I let myself feel what I'd earned. Dominic Ward wasn't just a name on a client list. I was the one they trusted now, and that was satisfying. Here's some questions for you, our viewers. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person in business? Do you think Dominic went too far? Or was his revenge justified? What would you do if you were fired unfairly? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell because we have more stories just for you.